think it makes my ministry. Every one of us has ministry, right? We have a ministry to fulfill, whether we're ordained or not. You know, every Christian has ministry functions to fulfill. And so I'm just kind of looking at that as part of it. Yeah. Yes. So that's again, sample size of one. Yeah, that's kind of where I would see. That's kind of, you know, it challenges my thinking on that. And a follow-up.
The reason why I ask is because when pastors feel the call to transition into another form of ministry, like Josie shared yesterday, they're often shamed, or their faith is questioned. You know, people say, well, I thought you were called. And their movement into another form of ministry is not walking away from their call. It is their call or God's direction of their ministry shifting to another focus versus them forsaking their call.
Yeah, I like that perspective because again, a lot of times we run into that, right? And when we go into another form of ministry and kind of the shaming or looking askance is happening, and how could you leave? You know, what are you doing? What's going on? Is your faith shaken? And I would say, from my standpoint, no, not really. I find my faith strengthened for what I'm doing, and I find the things that the connections that I have made across the Christian church, regardless of who we kind of identify with, has broadened my understanding of God's work in the world and the saving grace of Jesus Christ. So, yeah, so those are the kinds, when we again, and I think when we take this view and start thinking about calling, I think it gives everybody a lot more freedom, right? Freedom to be who they are. And what I would say is this, that when we think about your talents in spiritual ministries, just very simply, it's this. Your spiritual ministries or spiritual gifts are the what. And the what can change, okay? Depending upon the will of God, depending upon the Holy Spirit, depending upon the needs that are apparent, that can change. The what can change. But your talents are the how. This is how I'm going to live this out. And this is what makes more sense. Let's see, I had a hand up.
You touched on it a little bit.
Okay.
So thank you.
Just the thing I appreciate about this is it's consistent with how God relates to humanity, in that He never calls us to be self-centered.
Yeah.
He always calls us to be service-oriented. And all this navel-gazing, what about you? Just
it's
how God calls.
God calls us to be part of the community and be part of the transformation and be part of telling the story of the kingdom of God. Yeah. Yes.
So, to put what you're saying into a nutshell, basically, as we see this as a fluid movement, by the time the Lord has finished with us by growing us into different movement, then what Paul says in the scripture, he says that you may grow up into the full stature of Christ. In other words, that we can, through the movement of the fluidness of our small calling, we become in the fullness of Christ eventually the way He wants each one of us to be.
Yeah, I like that. It's as this kind of fluid, kind of in the small C callings that we have, we grow up into the fullness of Christ. Yeah, it's part of that journey. It's kind of that journey of where is God calling me to be? And I think, I'm going to give you the sample size of one, and my experience as I've looked at that. I had no inclination or desire to go to Gallup and do this. I had, my vision was that I would finish out my career, if you will, as a pastor in the United Methodist Church in Nebraska, and would probably, do that. But then along comes this call in the form of Jim Clifton saying, "Hey, by the way, would you be interested in doing this?" And then through a lot of prayer and conversation and figuring this out, it became very apparent that, you know what? Yeah, I should probably say yes to this. And I've been blessed. I've been so blessed to be able to do that. And it's been that journey. And it is, and I think how this whole idea of calling and callings relate to that, and again, the way I look at it, I never know what God's going to be up to in my life. If I try to predict that, that's a fool's errand. I just know I want to be ready. And so as I look back, and this is my connectedness, those of you with connectedness will understand kind of this language. I look that everything I have ever done is preparation for what is next. And I look back, and because of I've done some of these things, it has prepared me for this. And it's prepared me for some of the other things. So, it isn't that, it's about being ready. And it's about being open to what God is calling now. What ministry am I called to at this point and at this time? And, am I willing to say yes, when God comes calling? And understanding that, well, didn't see this coming. But if this is where you're calling me to, I guess you prepared me for this. And I look back and everything that has happened prepares. And, there's some things I'm absolutely not prepared for. And that's where I lean into and say, okay, God, if I'm to be here, I'm trusting you to help me figure this out. And I also know, too, you have given me these talents, the ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and I trust you that you will help me find ways to live this out so that I can be faithful. And that's kind of the way I look at it. So, yeah, there we go. So has Dr. Birding challenged your thinking a little bit this morning?
Yes.
Good, I'm glad. My work here is done. No, yeah, I found this refreshing, and I go back and I've read this book a couple of times, and I find all kinds of new stuff in here. But it really is. If you haven't got it, I would grab this. Kenneth Birding, What Are Spiritual Gifts? Rethinking the Traditional View. And it takes a while to wade through because it gets pretty deep. Yes.
I'm going to change what was my question.
Oh, okay.
Read out the part that we read and make a comment. And that is that it seems to me the conventional method with the desire motivation to help people discover the actual presuppositions of it actually can lead many church members to feel that I haven't discovered what my gifts are, therefore I can't do it. And therefore what it was designed to do, in not all cases, but in some cases, actually keep people from discovering it. Whereas where you made the comment, this frees people up to realize I have gifts and abilities, and I just need to use them where I am. Yeah. And that, to me, kind of is freeing but settling at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it is. It's freeing. It's a little unsettling, but it's like, oh man, I don't know if I have that gift. Maybe I shouldn't step into there because I don't know what my gifts are. And, I don't think I have any. Well, you do, and you're called to where is that greatest need? What are you drawn to? And that, I think, is really kind of what are the things that are drawn to? What's God laying upon your heart? Because then I think that's your spiritual ministry. Yeah. Good. Yes.
So, based on this, it sounds to me as though the challenge, I think through the process, somebody discovering what ministry they want to be in. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me as though the challenge just moves in a different direction. Mm-hmm. So in the past, the conventional way would be, what is my spiritual gifts? And that will lead me to a ministry. Mm-hmm. But if I take the entire question of spiritual gifts out, now it's just a question of what ministry. It's still the same challenge, though, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the practicality of it, one of the things that we did, and I've continued to do in the new church plan, and I adapted it from the Willow Creek model, which I really liked, is hey, let's try things out. Does this sound like a good idea? Let's try for 6 months, see how it goes. And I'll come back to you, and we'll come back in 6 months, see how it's going, and if it's a good fit, we'll go on. If not, we'll try something else. And let's see where you are, and give people, because a lot of times people think, I've signed up to be on the administrative council for the rest of my life, Then no, let's try it out. And give people the option, and we're going to give you, and we told that to all of our ministry team leaders, is hey, we're going to look for people, and they're going to have time to figure things out and try it out and see where it is. And because sometimes they may decide that they love it, they may decide, ooh, that sounded like a good idea, but you know what? I really probably need to be somewhere else. And that's good too. Or, I've done this long enough. And so one of the things that we do is every year give you an opportunity to either, sign up again or do something different, so that we don't assume that you're going to be there for life. But yeah, how do you help people try things out? Yeah, Bob, and then we're going to...
I don't know if in your dealings with Adventists to run across this, but we have some phraseology that Ellen White gave us, that God's biddings are his enablers. It seems to fit very well with what you're saying. He gives you the call, and of course he will give you what you need to do.
I love that.
Amen.
God's biddings are also God's enablings. Yeah, and so I kind of look at that too, as kind of going back to this whole idea of your talents, is if you're called to do this, if there's a need, you have everything you need. And that's one of the things I love about the whole idea of coaching. I've kind of run the whole spectrum from counseling to coaching to advising, but the whole idea, one of the things I love about coaching is you are not broken and I'm not trying to fix you. As your coach, you have everything you need inside you to be successful. My job is to draw that out, and I kind of put that into it. God's calling. God's callings are God's enablings. If you're called to do something, you feel strong, you should do this. Hey, you've got what you need, and we just need to help you apply that. Yes.
So a practice in the Seventh Adventist Church, and I know in many evangelical churches, is this idea of ordaining people to the gospel ministry, where you recognize that God has gifted and called you to do the gospel ministry. And so, with this in mind, do you suppose our idea of ordaining people to gospel ministry, a specific pastoral ministry, is that a little too shallow, or are we saying gospel ministry could be any?
Oh, that's really good, because that challenges our thinking, doesn't it? I think it could. So here's kind of where I come down, and this again goes to I think some ecclesiology and some things. I think there is something to the ordination process when you were ordained as a pastor in that process, and there's something that has to. And again, I'm not making this up, but I'm kind of thinking out loud here with you on this, because that's a very challenging question. And so my perspective is that there is something to it, and I think that as I think about the ordination process and everything I had to go through to be ordained, I think that is, I say this more than okay, but I think it is because I think there is so much responsibility in pastoral leadership. Right? There's so much riding on it, and that kind of, being ordained to a pastoral ministry, there's so much riding on it that you got to make sure that we really are taking this seriously and moving on, because it really is. I think there is something to that. I don't know quite what it is, but I think that there is that kind of sense, the sense about it, that we want to make sure through the whole process that we really are, because you've talked about it here, and you understand this, and we've all been this. I mean, when you talk about what gets you up and what gets you out of bed every morning, let's talk about the things that don't get us out of bed every morning. There are a lot of those things that we kind of have to deal with, and you know what? You're dealing with people, and people are messy, right? And there's all of those kinds of things you have to do, and there's a lot, and you have to. I think that there has to be, as you start thinking about it, as your role as kind of in terms of biblical interpretation, the kinds of things that have to go with that, so that you've got a sound understanding of Scripture, even beyond what we would do that. I think that there are some of the kinds of things that that if you are called to this, there are certain things that we want to make sure that happen. And then all of the, kind of from my side of things, all of the things that we had to do, to ensure that we would not inflict harm on a congregation. And, we've kind of all seen those kinds of things happen too, right? So I think that there is a responsibility from the Seventh-day Adventists, from the Methodists, to make sure that when we send pastors, or depending upon, or we send, here's the pool of pastors, that we say, you know what? They're going to be okay. And you're going to be okay with them as your leader. That's kind of the way I look at that, those kinds of things. Yeah, Rob. Am I okay, Mark? Okay, good. Thanks. Check things out. Yeah.
I think part of what you're saying is you're spot on. I think that there is the professional side of what we do.
Yeah.
Is what you're getting at.
Yes.
That process that lends itself ultimately to ordination, the process is probably more important than just the act.
Yes.
The process of knowing that those individuals that we're sending out, I remember, for my ordination, when giving a response, part of my response was thank you to the churches that allowed me to perform some malpractice activities. For that time, you're doing some stuff and going, whoa, boy. But ultimately, so it is. I mean, there's a great responsibility when you're leading a group of people and their spiritual concerns and their direction. That there's a professional, we have to just admit, there's a professional aspect to what we do.
And I think that when we think about that in terms of ordinance, the way I look at it, so let me liken it to this. When we had, so in the new church, when we took in members, we said, okay, membership, this isn't like American Express. Membership does not have its privileges. If you want to keep parking in the visitor space, don't join, because you know what, it isn't about privileges of membership. It's about responsibilities. And I kind of look at that with ordination. I look at my ordination, does not give me privileges. It gives me a huge, weighty responsibility. A responsibility to God, a responsibility to the gospel, a responsibility to the people that I serve, responsibility to my governing body, the United Methodists. And so it isn't about privileges. It's about, man, I got a whole lot of responsibility. And the ordination process, if you will, is kind of that endorsement that says, you know what, you're up to the challenge. And we trust you to live out this challenge, live out this responsibility that you've just taken on. Yeah.
I share that appreciation of the professional credential aspects and certification. We kind of make it more complicated when we ordain our elders and deacons, but we don't ordain our deaconesses traditionally. And we don't ordain our organist. Our church has been wrestling with combining the concept of deaconess with deacons so that there's not that distinction, sort of in the shadow of the insensitivity to gender that we've shown in ministerial.
And I think too that, again, I'm not getting into church polity, into your polity discussions, because that's not mine. And we all have our own struggles that we go through denominationally. We're kind of going through some now.
But I'm curious about how that parallels your traditions walk.
So we kind of have we used to have a two-step ordination process. It was you ordained a deacon, and then in 2 years you ordained a full elder. And so there were kind of two things. And elders were not kind of functions within the congregation, but they were functions. From Wesley's idea, we're elders. They're deacons and elders, and it's a two-step. Probably about maybe 15, maybe 20 years ago, we went to a single. We did an ordination just one step. You're either ordained as a deacon or ordained as an elder, and you have probationary. And so we looked at the two separate kinds of ministries: permanent deaconate, all kinds of things that are there with that. And so we've done some of those things too. So still doesn't quite make sense to me. I just do what I do. So yeah. One more, then we're going to take a break. Yes.
Looking back to your three categories of calling.
Yeah.
And ask a question about what we're talking about now, about ordination. And that is, I'd like to know how you would fit ordination into those three. And because here's what I'm thinking. Paul was called by the Lord, through salvation, and he was also called the apostle of the Gentiles. Which would be number 2. But he didn't get ordination until number 3, where he was specifically assigned to do that, because he spent many years. So I'm wondering how, and you're looking at integrating all of this, do you see ordination, because you come from a different theological and polity thing, so it's all your other perspectives and all. But I'm just wondering if even when we're ordaining pastors, we're thinking number 2, when we should be thinking number 3.
Okay, so I have strategic in my top 5. So my answer is it depends. That's a good strategic answer. So I would say it can be kind of that hybrid 2 and 3. And here's how I might look at that distinction. So Paul was called into salvation, his capital C. And then his calling into body and life administration, his calling there was as the apostle to the Gentiles. And we can all be grateful that he was, right? Because, here we are. And then I think, when I think about Paul, as church planters going to different places, as he would be in a while, he'd be in Corinth, he'd be in the churches in Galatia, and the way that he did that would be, I'm called at this time to go to Corinth to start a church. And so I would look at that in that framework with Paul. Maybe that helps with Paul. So I would also think, too, perhaps, in thinking about ordination, may fall into 2 or 3, just depending. So let me say this. So let me think about it this way. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here with you because you sparked some ideas with my ideation. So maybe I look at it this way, and I don't know, I might change my mind, later. But let's think about it this way. So I think about my ordination as an elder, first as a deacon, then an elder. Would be 2. Because I'm still, no matter what I'm doing, I am still ordained clergy in the United Methodist Church. My small c calling, in terms of that clergy, was then my first appointment was at Kearney. So I was called to be an associate pastor there, different role. My second assignment was new church planter. Planning a new church, planning at St. Andrews in Omaha. So that would be a small c calling to go do that because it's a very different type of ministry. But it's still under the whole rubric of being ordained, that second C. Then I went from there to senior pastor of St. Mark's in Lincoln. I was there for 2 years when God and Jim Clifton surprised me. And in 2000 I came to Gallup. So I'm living out a different type of calling now, small c. But I'm still, and part of what we have, again, within our denomination, we call them extension ministries. And I'm appointed to an extension ministry. I'm still recognized as ordained clergy. And the ministry I'm doing is not in the local church, and it's not even with an agency of the church. It's still recognized as ministry. And what I'm doing, and part of what I'm doing requires kind of the kinds of things I'm doing here. So the type of work I do as an ordained clergy in the United Methodist Church changes. And so that might be where I see the small c, S, and then the small c, kind of the second one is kind of where my ordination comes into play. I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud with you here. And I may, as you think about it, you may say, I don't quite see that. And that's fine, because we're just kind of thinking about it here. Okay? Thank you. Good. All right. Hey, let's take a break. Okay, let's take a break and come back at 11:30. I see we opened up a whole lot of things here. I wouldn't say can of worms, because we opened up a whole lot of things here, and we are grateful to Dr. Birding for doing that. So let's take a break. Let's be back in and start at 11:30. Let's take 15 minutes. Okay, and we'll pick up where we left off, and we'll edit as we go.